Hello, everybody. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm the founder and director of Working with Cancer, which is a UK social enterprise which provides coaching, support, training and consultancy services to employers, employees with cancer and working carers to help them manage work and cancer at any stage. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Jane Clark, a consultant clinical psychologist and lead for the psychology team in a large NHS trust in the north of England. She's doing this interview in her own time, so is not representing the trust. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Dr. Peter Harvey, published on the Cancer Counselling Trust website in 2004, which was about the psychological impact of cancer. And just after he retired in 2007, Peter spent 6 months updating the work with Jane's help. Many people have found his work to be very helpful. So when Sarah Lionagi, the founder of Ticking Off Breast Cancer, asked Jane to write a short article on life after cancer, that spurred Jane during lockdown to refresh the information. And she did that with Peter Harvey's approval, and her revised article is now available on our website. Jane, I'm delighted to welcome you to this video. Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate your taking part.
No problem. Thanks for the invitation.
So perhaps you can just start by telling us what led you to become a clinical psychologist, and how did your interest and focus on cancer come about?
Okay. Well, I'm always interested in people and their stories and what they've been through, and I studied science at school like most people, and kind of was interested in the application of science to behaviour, and I had good fortune really in that I met a clinical psychologist when I was fairly young. My mum was a social worker, and she worked alongside a clinical psychologist, so I got to meet one of them and find out what they did, and it just sounded like such an interesting career. I then went on and did a bit of what was then called I was an auxiliary nurse for a while. It's now called a healthcare assistant. And so I wanted to work in an acute hospital. I enjoyed that sort of environment and caring for people. And I then I went on to study psychology, was really interested in it. During my clinical training, I worked with Professor Leslie Walker in Hull, and he had done a lot of research around supporting people with cancer and had set up these big centres for people to drop into whilst they were having treatment. And I just thought it was fascinating that providing really good psychological support during people's cancer treatment actually made a big difference to how they coped and their quality of life. And yeah, I just thought it's really exciting as a psychologist to really make a difference to people's lives when they were going through such a difficult experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly an area that has become more recognised as having such an impact on people's lives. So Jane, how does a cancer diagnosis affect people emotionally, and why is that the case?
I guess it can affect people in so many different ways. We're all unique as people, and it depends where a cancer diagnosis lands, what else is happening in someone's lives, what's happened before them, what their experience of cancer already is. But for most people, it's a huge shock. Even though we know the statistic that 1 in 2 people will be affected by cancer, we still don't think it will happen to us. So it's usually a shock when it happens. And unfortunately, it is a life-threatening illness, and that it comes with such uncertainty that it gives people a real jolt. Life used to be predictable. We used to feel perhaps in control of our lives, and suddenly we've become aware of a real vulnerability. It's almost like the foundations are shaken really of our world. So it's a really difficult diagnosis to have to face. And of course, treatment can have such wide-ranging impacts on people, with body change, long-term effects, side effects of treatment, fatigue for a lot of people, and just their affects their ability to engage in everyday life. And people describe it as an emotional roller coaster, not only going through treatment, but at the end of treatment as well. So it's a lot of psychological trauma to face, a lot of kind of meaning making sense of the world now. And so for a lot of people, it means anxiety often is an emotion that comes to the fore, low mood, perhaps grief about how life has changed, a loss of confidence, a loss of psychological change in people.
Okay, now I recognise that, not only to some extent in myself, particularly when I was first diagnosed, but amongst many of the people we support. It's interesting that sometimes people say, well, that there's things like Parkinson's and diabetes. Why is cancer somehow worse than those things? What would you say?
I think it's a really tricky one, because every diagnosis carries a personal trauma. I think the cancer diagnosis is so significant because it brings with it this possibly lifelong uncertainty. You've been given this devastating news, you're treated for it, and then people can't be given a guarantee that it won't come back again. And I think that's a big psychological challenge, to live with that uncertainty. Yeah. And of course, treatments have changed so fundamentally over the last 10-20 years, but it used to be very life-threatening. And we're only kind of catching up with it now, that actually people can live with cancer for many years and be well and have a healthy, fulfilling life. But I think our perception of cancer hasn't quite caught up with that. So a lot of people carry that fear around what will happen. And that, as I said before, treatment can be so life-changing. It can change your body in ways that can never be reversed. And you have to live with maybe some sort of significant change to your body. So it's tricky, and I wouldn't want to compare and say someone's other diagnosis was any less significant, because I think comparison's a dangerous game, really. We can always find someone in a better situation, and we can always find someone in a worse situation, but it doesn't change our own situation. What we have to deal with is what we have to deal with. I think the other tricky thing about cancer is everyone has a story. So if you're diagnosed with cancer, people often say, oh, my mum had this, or my auntie had that, and they bring these stories that can sometimes not be very helpful for people. And make comparisons which are equally not very helpful. So if I know someone who had this situation or impact, then it must apply to you as well, which is, as you say, not very helpful. So Jane, tell me about your work with Peter Harvey. Okay, yes. So I started work with Peter Harvey, I think in 2004, where he was the clinical psychologist leading the team, and I was a relatively newly qualified psychologist joining him in the team. And we worked together. It was just the two of us at that time. I think we had trainees in the team, but generally it was just the two of us. And he did a talk, I think I've traced it right back, I think it's 1999, he did a talk for the National Conference of Cancer Self-Help Groups. And I think it really resonated with people. People really recognised what he was describing. And it was the first time somebody had put it into words, I think. Social media has changed the landscape of cancer support, but back then people didn't have the connections that we have now. So here was somebody standing up saying something that really described people's individual experience of cancer, and I think it really took off from there. And he was encouraged to write articles and share this way he was framing how people felt after cancer treatment. And so he continued to kind of tweak at it, and then he decided to retire, but felt actually he wanted to leave the cancer community something and his work. So he spent about 6 months after his retirement kind of researching and putting things together, and I was able to kind of contribute to that and help him get it into a form he was happy with. And then he put it on the Cancer Counselling Trust, and then he very lovely handed it over to me and said, right, I'm done, I'm off to retire and enjoy my life. And I left it for a while, and I think it was lockdown and Sarah, as you say, from taking off breast cancer, that finally gave me the impetus to start refining things, and bring it up to date a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing, really helpful body of work, which I think, you and Peter should be immensely proud of. I can't tell you how many people have read those articles and found them very helpful and resonate so much with individual people's experience. I'm talking about people with any, all forms of cancer and at any stage, men and women and different ethnicities. I think so many people do relate to them. One of the things several things I wanted to ask you about the psychological impact of cancer, and one of them is that people classically, even the most confident people can suffer a significant loss of confidence and anxiety, and as you know, in some cases, depression, sometimes even PTSD. And so, Jane, what advice would you give people suffering loss of confidence or depression? What would you say to them?
I think the first thing is to allow themselves the opportunity to rest and recover and recuperate. Acknowledge what you've been through. You've been through an enormous amount, so you need this time to rest and recover. And we talk a lot about compassion in psychology, which is being sensitive to our own distress or others' distress, and trying to do something about it. So being compassionate towards ourselves, which I think a lot of people, particularly in the UK, struggle with that idea. So if you do struggle, treat yourself as if you were treating a good friend. We would never be critical of someone else for them not recovering quick enough or not doing something. We would be kind, we would be understanding, and it's trying to apply that to ourselves, and allow yourself space to grieve some of the things you've probably lost through cancer and its treatment, and just really nurture yourself. So think about what food you're feeding yourself, what exercise you're giving your body, what kind of sleep and rest you're giving your body. All those little things add up and help us to recover. We also talk a lot about doing more of the things that matter to you. So we might feel an obligation to do certain things in life, but cancer is one big wake up call sometimes. So you can review some of your priorities in life. And I know we all need to work for money, and that's an essential of life, but there's time around that. So try and do more of what really, really matters to you. Be with the people who matter to you, and live your life as the way you really want it to. That we don't often get second chances, but sometimes this feels like a second chance.
No, that's all good advice. I always say that cancer can be, you wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it can be incredibly character forming in terms of giving people a much better sense of themselves and their priorities and what's important to them. And you talked about people wanting to sort of get back to their old life, as it were. What would you say to people, who just say, I just want to go back to normal, and very often you'll find families, that like mums and dads of people with cancer, that generation will say, let's just forget about it and move on, or move on, but let's just get back to how things were. Treatment's done, finished, done, let's forget about it. Now let's go back. What would you say to people who try to do that?
I think it's really understandable. Life was perhaps simpler before, or perceived as simpler, so there's that desperation to go back, but you can't unknow what you know now, and I think that's a tough thing. Your body and your mind have been through so many changes. I think it's really difficult for family and friends because it's hard to feel powerless, and it's hard to see people suffer. So they are desperate for their family member or their friend to just get back to normal now as well, because that makes everybody feels better. So it's a challenging situation, but I guess the message is you can't unknow what you know now. So you're going to have to look after yourself, pace yourself, allow yourself to recover, and pace your limited energy, and do what really matters to you. If you can, if you've got that luxury, try and maybe reprioritize, do what really matters to you. and maybe kind of direct friends and family a little bit. I know you want me to be back to normal, but I can't just step out of this world into post-treatment world. So I need a path to move along.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting dilemma as well, because very often people don't want to upset their members of their family by somehow being changed, as it were. So very often we'll hide a lot of that emotional distress.
Yes.
Because of the fear of how that might impact the other people.
Absolutely. And I think people feel like, I've had all this support through treatment, so now I'm at the end of it, I can't possibly ask for more emotional support now, so I must get on with normal. We write about this in the articles, but it's not that simple. Actually, the emotional impact tends to hit people at the end of their treatment, because before that their focus has been so much on survival, getting to the right appointments, making sure their counts are okay so they can have chemotherapy, or getting a parking space so they can actually turn up for their radiotherapy. It's very practical. So actually it's only at the end of treatment people have the space and the time to reflect on what they've been through emotionally, and then people feel like, I've already had a year of support, can't possibly ask for more now. But of course you can, and I think sometimes you just need to explain to people how you're feeling, and direct them a little bit in how they can support you best.
Yeah, no, that's very good advice. I was going to say, what advice would you give to an employer who's worried about an impact on an employee, on their emotional state, and what could an employer do to support someone with cancer, do you think?
Okay. I think first it's becoming more aware of people's needs. I said before, we're all unique. So I guess talking to people, what are their personal needs, and maybe trying to tailor things specifically for that individual. So if people want to talk, give them the space to talk about where they're at, what are their triggers, what do they find more difficult, if they've got a scan approaching, if they've got an anniversary approaching of their diagnosis or the start of their treatment. Don't make assumptions about what might be difficult for people, because I think that varies, and people need to be able to say what they really need. I guess familiarise yourself with what support's available. There's lots and lots of support out there, so encourage people to get in touch with it. And as an employer, and I know there's businesses of different sizes, but familiarise yourself with occupational health routes, employee assistance programs if they're available to you, so that you can signpost people for help who want it. And I guess I would really love it if employers gave people time and permission to look after themselves. I think people feel like, I've already been off sick for 6 months, I can't possibly ask for time to go for my psychology appointment, for example. But actually that is such an important part of their recovery. So if employers can accommodate people to be flexible in how they work, so that they can still go to group meetings perhaps, or psychology appointments, counselling appointments, the appointments that they have with their clinical teams, I think that people become very anxious about getting the time to do that, but they're so important. And actually people will pay you back by doing that. They will work an hour in the evening to do it, because they want to do a good job often. They just need that little bit of flexibility.
No, we often find people feel very guilty about taking more time off. They feel that everyone's been nice to them while they've been sick, and they've kind of done as much as they should do, and now they feel guilty taking, their employer's done as much as they should do, and now they feel guilty taking more time away, when actually it's really, as you say, really necessary for them to have that additional support. It's part of the recovery process, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And for people who are living with secondary cancer, not everyone is fortunate enough to get rid of their cancer. So people who are living with secondary cancer can still be amazing employees and add such value to the workplace, but they just need that flexibility to be able to work around their cancer treatments and their days where they know they're going to struggle. But if employers can give them the space to do it, it adds such value to the workplace, and also to that individual. Work is such a core part of our identity and who we are.
Yeah.
And it gives us that confidence. So if people can be enabled to work if they want to, I think that's a great place to be.
Yeah, I think flexibility is one really key and important area for employers. And what would you counsel employers not to do, would you say?
I guess don't make assumptions. So don't hold a rigid timeline of recovery or expect one thing. I think that's that personal touch, isn't it? Really asking people what they need. I think it's dangerous to kind of criticize or imply weakness if people need a bit of extra time or support. So if a plea not to do that. And not imposing, we've talked about this already, that those rigid conditions around work, if people can have that flexibility, so it's possible to work, keeping in touch days, shorter hours, and a longer, people often get a 4-week phased return to work. Well, 4 weeks is nothing. So if there's any way of making that a much longer process and making it responsive to people's needs and reviewing it regularly, that's the kind of advice I'd
and of course, and I would add, from a working with cancer perspective, people are legally entitled to that, so employers, please note. And if I'm a colleague of someone who's got a cancer diagnosis, what advice would you give colleagues that would reinforce the support they're getting from an employer, say? Because very often people get very embarrassed, and there's a classic thing where people don't know what to do or what to say, and they'll even go into avoidance mode and move to another part of the office so they don't have to talk to somebody. But what advice would you give them?
I guess ask people what they want. They're human beings. This is another human being. Ask them what they want. Do they want to talk about it at work? Do they want to not talk about it at work? Don't ignore that elephant in the room. And check in on a person-to-person basis. How are you? How are things going? Fill them in on the office gossip. Keep them up to date with the little changes that maybe feel insignificant, but actually, if you're out of the workplace for 6 months, those little changes are really important. So that regular contact. I mean, if you're in a position to offer someone's practical support, when people are going through treatment, it's really hard to walk the dog sometimes, or get the shopping, or get the car MOT done. Perhaps there's something really practically, if you work as a team, perhaps you could work out, well, if you could give them a lift here on this day, and you could take their car for an MOT on this day, those practical things could really support people and make a difference. And then the emotional support, invite people around for a cup of tea and a chat. It has many healing benefits.
Absolutely.
And then I guess as a colleague, it's trying to support people to really take that flexible working and put themselves first, that self-care. And if you do that all as a team, and that's a team culture, it makes, for an individual, it makes it much easier to engage in that kind of behaviour. No, all good advice. So finally, Jane, is there anything else you would like to add about the sort of psychological impact of cancer, or how to support someone with cancer? Anything we've not discussed that you think you should add? I think don't be afraid to ask for help. I think, as you've mentioned already, people feel like they've had so much help through treatment, they almost feel guilty to ask for more, but it takes the strongest person to recognise they need help and to access it. So please don't be afraid to ask for help. And there's lots and lots of organisations out there, Maggie's, Macmillan. Within the clinical teams, there may be clinical psychologists who are working and able to support you. So please don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't suffer alone with these feelings. There's lots of social connections out there now on forums like Facebook or Twitter. So reach out to people who are going through a similar experience. The comfort in hearing from other people who are going through a similar experience, it can be enormous. I know it's not for everybody, but for some people that can bring great benefits. So do that. And yeah, you mentioned the articles right at the start. We're always keen for feedback, so I'm very happy to receive feedback by your organisation, if you don't mind, Barbara. If people want something changed or want something expanded on, please get in touch with us and let us know.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah, I think the articles are amazing, and I'm really hoping that more and more people do read them. Jane, a huge thank you for giving us your time and for your work and the work of your colleagues that you're all doing to support cancer survivors. It is, I don't know if you must know this, but it is extraordinarily helpful. So thank you very much for that. And then to people who are listening to this video, what I'd like to do is say, if you'd like to read Jane's article, please visit our website at www.workingwithcancer.co.uk. It can be found under the resources tab. And if you'd like more information about working with cancer, please contact us via the website or by emailing admin@workingwithcancer.co.uk. As I said, a big thank you to Jane for all the work that she and her colleagues do. Thank you for listening today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.